Today, we're continuing on with A Long Way from Chicago by Richard Peck. If you've missed the previous chapters, there's a link to the story's full playlist in the description below. Chapter 5, Part 1, coming up next. Welcome to Read with Maren, where I share with you fun, wholesome, and inspiring stories that you can share with the whole family. Stay to the end, and I'll share with you some of my thoughts, as well as the inevitable blooper. We're starting a new summer with Grandma, 1933, the Phantom Brakeman. Down at Grandma's, the only thing that reminded us of home and Chicago was knee-high. This was an orange pop at a nickel a bottle. With the 25 cents apiece that Dad gave Mary Alice and me, we could each buy 5 knee-highs during the week, if we could slip off from Grandma long enough to get our allowances spent. The Coffee Pot Cafe kept the knee-highs along with grapettes and Dr. Peppers and a sheet metal vat of ice water, with a bottle opener hanging down on a piece of twine. Grandma said that she didn't like knee-high because the bubbles in it gave her gas. Mary Alice said anything that cost money gave Grandma gas. We made ourselves scarce that first afternoon and headed uptown before Grandma could find us any chores. I was 13 at last, so I'd thank you to call me Joe, not Joey. And I walked a few strides ahead of Mary Alice. For one thing, she had been taking dancing lessons all year and never went anywhere without her tap shoes and a drawstring bag. The greatest movie star in history was sweeping the country at the time, a girl younger than Mary Alice, named Shirley Temple. Shirley could sing and act, and she was a tap-dancing demon. Every girl in America was taking tap to be the next Shirley Temple. Though Mary Alice was getting a little too leggy to be a child star, Mother said taking tap would give her poise. So, Mary Alice was apt to stop cold on a sidewalk and run through a tap routine in her regular sandals. I wasn't going to wait while she did that, so we each acted like the other one didn't exist. The only people in the coffee pot were a couple of farm women passing the time of day with Mrs. Ike Cripe. As proprietor, Mrs. Cripe wore a crocheted handkerchief pinned to her apron and a hairnet. She saw us come in. First, the screen door closed behind me. Then it opened again, and Mary Alice made her entrance. You could tell that Mrs. Cripe wanted our nickels before we fished the knee-highs out of the water. She was deep in conversation with the farm women, but when I started to put my nickel on the counter, her palm was outstretched to take it. Above on the wall was a framed picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had beaten out Hoover as President of the United States. He hung between 2 signs. Double yolk breakfast served all day, with sausage, bacon, or ham, your choice, 20 cents. And blue plate special, liverwurst or tuna sandwich, cup of our coffee thrown in, 10 cents. Mrs. Cripe and the farm women were remarking on what a handsome man Franklin Delano Roosevelt was. "Don't it beat all how a man that good-looking would marry a wife that plain?" said one of the farm women, who would have known a thing or two about plainness. "That Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt is as plain as a mud fence." "Maybe she's a good cook," the other farm woman offered. "Kissing don't last, good cooking does." Mrs. Cripe rang up 2 nickel sales on the register. "Men don't have any idea about women," she said. This big statement quieted the farm women. Then Mrs. Cripe said, "They cousins, you know." "Who is?" "The Roosevelts. He married his cousin." The toothpick stopped dead in the farm women's mouths. "You don't mean it." "It was in the paper." Mrs. Cripe reached under her apron to adjust a strap. "Was it legal?" the farm women whispered. "I couldn't say," Mrs. Cripe replied. "Them Roosevelts isn't Illinois people." Their voices dropped lower. I'd noticed before, marrying your cousin was a touchy subject around here. But now it was time for our knee-highs. Half the pleasure was sticking your arm up to the shirt sleeve and fishing in the ice water for a bottle. Mary Alice plunged in at her end. We took our time. In those days, before air conditioning, just getting one arm cooled off was a treat. We elbowed aside the grapettes. You couldn't get enough for your money with a great bet, and it left your mouth purple. And the Dr. Peppers tasted like cough medicine. When we had our knee-highs in hand and opened, Mary Alice took a booth at the back. I settled at the table with the checkerboard in the front window. In the past, Mrs. Ch.5 had a fry cook and another lady working at the counter, but she was down to herself now, except for a girl who was wiping the tables with a wet rag. You had to look twice to see her. She was that skinny and pale as a ghost. A light breeze would have blown her into the back room, but she was keeping busy. She went at the tabletops like she was killing rats. When she worked her way over to Mary Alice's booth, they fell into a murmuring conversation. Mary Alice took out her tap shoes to show her, so it must be girl talk. I was glad to be up here away from it. I was coming to the age when I didn't know how near girls I was supposed to be. Mrs. Ch.5 didn't ring up a sale after the farm women left, so they must have just come in for the toothpicks. I was making my knee-high last. Then, from my seat in the window, I saw a woman pull up out front. She dropped down from a buckboard and tied her old mule to the rail. The mule wore a straw hat, and the woman wore a sunbonnet. She was the toughest-looking woman you ever saw. She made Mrs. Ike Ch.5 look like a movie star. Stomping in through the front door in a pair of unmatching shoes, she made for the cash register. For a bad moment, I thought she was going to hold up the place. "Well, Miss Eubanks," Miss Ch.5 said, "what is it?" The sunbonnet woman, Miss Eubanks, stuck a grubby paw under Miss Ch.5's nose. "Let me have my girl's wages." She jerked her head to the back booth where the wispy girl was lingering at Mary Alice's table. "I give her 15 cents already today," Miss Ch.5 said. "You done paid her before she worked out her day?" Miss Eubanks was confounded. "A fool and her money is soon parted." She headed for the wispy girl, whose eyes looked hunted and scared. Grabbing the front of the girl's uniform, she said, "Give me that 15 cents or I'll turn you every way but loose." The girl hung there in her mother's grasp. Mary Alice sat below them, stunned. In a small voice, the girl said, "I need the money." "You don't have no needs except I say so." The woman barked nose to nose with her. "Cough it up." When she turned her loose, the girl reached down as slow as she dared and took something out of her shoe. It must have been the full 15 cents because Miss Eubanks' hands closed over it, making a fist. She shook it at the girl. "And when you get home tonight, I'll take your back wages out of your hide. Girl, you won't set down till the first frost. I know what you're up to, missy. You're sly, but you don't put nothing over on me." She stalked out of the place, past Miss Ch.5, who hadn't liked being called a fool. The girl stood beside Mary Alice, trying not to cry. Mary Alice reached up to touch her hand. She was trying to say something to make the girl feel better, but I didn't look or listen. I didn't know what to do. Pretty soon we started for home. I left some knee-high in the bottom of the bottle, and I think Mary Alice did too. We walked together now. I waited when she stopped on an unbroken slab of sidewalk and went into one of her tap steps. She held out her skirts in the Shirley Temple way, but her heart wasn't in it. She was just going through the motions. Her mind was somewhere else. "Who was that girl anyway?" I said finally. "Vandalia Eubanks. And that old crow in the bonnet was her mother. She wants to rule Valinda's life." I shrugged. "Well, she is her mother." "She's her jailer," Mary Alice said. "Valinda's 17. 17? She doesn't even look 12. "A starved 17, Mary Alice said, "and she needs a friend." Then her jaw clamped shut in Grandma's own way, and she didn't say anything else all the way home. When we got there, Grandma was out in the yard standing over a thing made out of lumber in the shape of a teepee. Nearby was a pile of stove lengths and a circle of burned ground where she had cooked down her apples for apple butter. She waved us over. "We're making soap." Until we had started coming to Grandma's, we thought soap was a pink bar that came out of a wrapper labeled Cashmere Bouquet. but that cost 7 cents, and Grandma made her own. Soon she had us as busy as bird dogs. She sent Mary Alice to the pump for pail after pail of water, and she sent me to the house for coal scuttles full of wood ash from the kitchen stove. Grandma poured the water through the teepee, which was a hopper. When it dropped through the ash, it came out as lye. Grandma caught it in a pan, and we worked until supper time. Before we went inside, she had built up a big fire from the stove lengths and shavings. After supper, Grandma and I worked through what she called the cool of the evening. Mary Alice had managed to vanish, but the heavy work was over. The fire had burned down just right. Over the glowing embers, Grandma put an old pot on a tripod. We dumped the lye into it with just the right amount of water. Now she added what looked to me like garbage. Ham skins, bacon rinds, and things too mysterious to mention. We took turns stirring the witch's brew as darkness crawled over the yard. The blossoms on the morning glory vine were little tight blue fists, and you could hear the husky singing from the cornfield across the fence. Grandma looked up, far out to the west, down where the road and the Wabash track seemed to meet. She scanned the far horizon, maybe waiting for me to ask what she was looking for. "What are you looking for, Grandma?" "The brakeman," she said, still scanning. "You mean the brakeman off the Wabash Railroad?" She nodded. "This about the time of evening he's been known to show." "Who is he, Grandma?" She turned on me. "You mean you never heard the story?" She took over the stirring, turning the paddle with both hands. "It happened back in 1871, and it all came to pass because of the Great Fire of Chicago. The town of Decatur was sending a special train full of volunteers to fight that fire Miss O'Leary's cow started. Course, railroad signals was very simple in them early times, and it was a foggy night. Somehow, train full of firefighters got stuck on the same track as the Wabash freight train. They met head on. It was just half a mile along them tracks, down by that stand of timber on the way to Salt Creek." Grandma nodded down the road to the timber, a dark smudge in the distance. "Killed a brakeman on the front train and both engineers. Oh, you never saw such a mess." Grandma shook her head. "I was only a babe in arms, but I remember it well. My ma walked the tracks down there and held me up to see it. They'd pried the locomotives apart and taken out the dead, but it was a sight to behold. They said the dead bodies looked like they'd been fed through a sausage grinder." I swallowed hard, but I was always interested in anything from her early life that might explain Grandma. The paddle in her hand turned slow in the foul brew as she looked down in the dark woods. "Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the story." She glanced my way. "The brakeman's been seen since." The darkness deepened around us, and a star or two came out. "The brakeman that got chewed up like he'd been through the sausage grinder?" Grandma nodded. "Years go by without a sighting, and then on a hazy night somebody'll see the brakeman down there between the rails, swinging an old-time railroad lantern. Or they're spotted dim yellow light deep in the timber, like he's a wandering soul, still trying to head off the oncoming train." "Grandma?" I said in a breaking voice, though my voice was beginning to break anyway. "Are you talking about the brakeman's ghost?" She pursed her lips to give a considered opinion. "I don't say one way or another. All I know is some people won't go down that road after dark by themselves." Grandma hiked up her skirts to keep them out of the fire, and the glowing embers made it as hot as noonday sun. But goosebumps popped out on my arm anyway. "Course, I'm talking about ignorant people," Grandma said. "Superstitious people." I had some trouble settling down that night. It was the first night after the visit, so that was normal. But every time my eyes closed, I saw the Phantom Brakeman with hamburger meat for a face, swinging a ghostly lantern through the tree branches like skeletons. So I was up and down. As bad luck would have it, my bedroom window looked west to the haunted woods. I kept getting up to look in case a lantern was swinging in the trees, but I didn't see anything. Then I was no sooner asleep than I was awake again. Some sound woke me. I didn't move in the bed, hoping not to hear it anymore, but I heard some snuffling, like crying. It seemed to come from Mary Alice's room. I thought I heard her voice too, just a few words, though she never talked in her sleep. Now I was bolt awake and the goosebumps were back. Wearing only my BVDs, I got up and looked out into the hall. Mary Alice's door was shut tight, though we never closed our bedroom doors, hoping for a breeze. I crept over, but I didn't try the knob, which was bound to be locked. I rapped lightly. This brought forth a little startled yipping sound from inside. Quicker than if I had awakened her, little feet padded across her creaking floor. Her keyhole spoke. "What?" "Mary Alice, are you alone in there?" "Who wants to know?" "Who do you think? Are you?" "No," she said. "And don't whisper so loud." "Who's in there with you?" "A puppy." "A puppy?" I said. "Where did you get a puppy?" "The Cobb house." "You don't go in the Cobb house," I said. "He came out. He followed me home. I'm calling him Skipper. That's what you're hearing, Joey. Don't tell Grandma. She doesn't believe in indoor pets." I gave up, though I didn't quite believe in the pet either, Skippy or whoever. But I was too tired to argue. I went back to bed and slept like a log. We'll pause there for now. It's interesting that coming from Chicago, Joey, and Mary Alice had to see something that really scared them. The mother who was mistreating her daughter in the coffee pot cafe. It's places like this and times like this that we start to realize the blessings we have in our lives. And as we can see, they both felt a little heavy in their hearts, knowing that they wanted to help somebody that they weren't sure how to. I think it's good for us to remember that of all the things in our lives, we truly are blessed. There's always somebody out there who has it a little bit harder or just simply a little bit worse. And we can count our blessings and look for ways to help others. Remember to always look for the good in the world. And if you struggle to see it, make it yourself. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. We made... Wasn't ready for that. Where we are picking... Okay, I was trying to remember what I was going to say. I can't even remember where I'm at. 1933. This of home... but now we got to go to the show. Time for the show. I'm not vibrant and I'm annoying, and we go over the who would have known a thing or two about playing this? You know? You with me? Yeah, she would have. Ooh, girl. I'm just a hot mess express. It's okay, you only have a little bit left anyway. All I know, I'm going to do that. Whoa.